Okay. Okay, hi everybody. How's the audio? Is it good enough? All right. Tim and I are here to talk to you about writing Ansible modules and why it's kind of nice to do the hard stuff in Python. To do some quick intros, my name is Colin Vallance. I'm a principal technical architect at CDW. I lead the programmability team. The sort of charter for our team is to drive programmability automation back into our service practices. So a lot of engineers that do a lot of stuff, not all of them write code, and we're saying, hey, you really should. We should think about mature software methodologies, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a lot of what I get to focus on. Python user since like 2013. I had an argument with a bash script and I never looked back. And then my personal life is cats, electronics, ham radio, and I have a payphone that I'm working on if anyone wants to talk about that. It's a weird one. All right, Tim?
Yeah, I'm slightly less cool than Colin. My name's Tim Way. I'm a senior consulting engineer here at CDW. So I work in our delivery arm. So I'm one of the individuals you might see if your company got services from us. If one of those services was Ansible related, you're almost certainly going to see myself or one of my peers. I work very closely in that arm. So Ansible is a product I'm very knowledgeable about. Love the Python connection. Was super excited to meet up with Colin and give this talk. As the slide says, right, I've done a ton of stuff in open source over the years, longtime Linux user, contributed to Ansible itself and various subcomponents of Ansible. So yeah, and Docker and Podman, right? There's Kim in the back with Red Hat, who's all about Podman. Yeah, so for those that don't know or don't understand the container reference there, I'm very passionate about which container runtime I use and more than happy to talk about it after the talk.
All right, and before we run out of time, I want to just, again, thank Brian and Kim for CDW and Red Hat sponsorship. And without those two, we wouldn't be here, and your drinks and food would be paid for by somebody else, I guess. All right, so real quick, because it's awful to look at code on a presentation slide, if anyone wants to check out the repo, feel free, grab that QR code if it works with the extra lines. That stuff will be available after the fact, too, that you can check out. We've got a couple of things that we'll probably need to upload tonight. We got most of it in earlier. Hopefully that's enough time, and we'll go to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about Ansible. If you are not familiar with Ansible, which is possible, I suppose, it's an open source command line automation software written in Python. It can do a whole lot of stuff. Configure systems, deploy software, orchestrate advanced workflows, kind of anything you can think of almost, Ansible can probably do it. It typically uses SSH for transport, although you can use other methods. Everything configuration-wise is going to be in YAML. It's able to keep secrets safe using something called Ansible Vault. And there's integrations galore. Like anything you could think of, there's probably some sort of integration for Ansible. Ansible comes in multiple flavors. So there is the community Ansible that if you've installed this from Python command line and used Ansible core, it's probably what you're used to. Open source, command line driven, and runs on, we'll say, most OSs. That asterisk is because it doesn't run natively on Windows. So you get around that with WSL like I do, or you run it in some sort of container or other virtualization. There's also AAP, which is formerly Ansible Tower, if you're familiar with that. That's a subscription-based product. It's got all the fancy stuff that you'd expect out of the enterprise grade side, high availability, clustering, this really cool containerized environment, and the like REST API and task engine. And since Tim's the expert, I'll let him do a little bit more justice.
Yeah. So again, Ansible Automation Platform, when they rebranded from Ansible Tower, for me, in my mind, the way that maps is the platform component of that word, meaning there isn't just this one website you go to called Ansible Tower and you run jobs. The platform really exposes so much more, right? You get the ability to run jobs, all those enterprise features Colin was talking about. You also get a fully fledged container repository called Private Automation Hub. And then that feature also supports loading your own Ansible modules and collections up to it. They also just came out with a new product called Event-Driven Ansible. That's part of the platform, right? So Red Hat's really working as they think of these different automation use cases and requirements, building those directly into the product. So if you're a Red Hat customer, you buy the platform, you're a big enterprise usually, you get this kind of ecosystem of tools, right? A big warm Ansible hug, as I like to think of it. So you may start over here on this left-hand side of the slide, right? The community-driven side, that's where you get exposure to it. You use it locally in your job maybe. Like, oh, I need to scale this up. That's where you tend to move to that right side of the diagram and go, okay, I need to get the product, I need to get logging and role-based access control and all that good stuff.
All right, so not knowing how familiar anybody is with Ansible, we're going to do some terminology stuff just to kind of get everyone on the same page. We'll talk about playbook, collection role, galaxy, all this fun stuff. So a playbook, if you're not familiar, it's sort of like the basic unit of Ansible. It's really what you're going to approach first. It's essentially a list of instructions that goes and manages a piece of infrastructure. And manage means whatever sort of you want it to, because each play has potentially different infrastructure parts that could do different things. That can be very expansive or it can be very simple. So a single play could say, I'm going to install Nginx. That's it. But I could do it across 100 servers at once and just have Ansible go run that. I'm letting Tim handle this one.
I get all the slides with all the words. That's how that works now. All right, so once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, when we first wrote our Ansible playbooks and we built some reusable content, we were like, hey, it'd be really great if I could share them with other people, right? We come to ChiPy and we're like, hey, I'd like to give you my Nginx role that Colin was just talking about. And how would you do that? So the initial unit of sharing in the Ansible ecosystem was the roles. So you'd be able to package some of that Ansible content, typically like playbook-like content, into a role, and you could upload it to a public website called Ansible Galaxy. That product I was talking about in the platform earlier, component of that is Private Automation Hub. Think of that as an on-premise Ansible Galaxy, right? So enterprises like to keep things, close to home. That's where that kind of facsimile comes. Either way, we outgrew roles pretty quickly. So one of the things in our talk tonight, we're going to talk about developing a module, a type of plugin. And there was no great mechanism in that role structure to share that with other people. So they were like, okay, how do we do this? And a couple years ago, they came up with this great idea called a collection. And really a collection, and what's kind of interesting is the role can be in a collection, but the collection can't be in a role, if you think of it that way. So this collection is truly a collection of any Ansible content that you want to share with someone else, whether that's a module, plugin, playbook. Again, anything you can think of in that ecosystem goes in a collection, and that's what you share with other people.
All right, so Tim mentioned Galaxy. It is the web-based repository for roles and collections. The little image on the right is basically the Galaxy help menu. It is open source, and you'll see often if you go to Galaxy and take a look for stuff, you'll see namespacing. So a lot of vendors have their own namespacing. Microsoft, Amazon, et cetera. You'll see all of the collections that they put together to use with their product. Tim will come back over here and we'll talk about that AAP certified collections because that's a huge benefit of, I think, AAP.
Yeah. Yep. So again, Red Hat has a number of collections that they've pre-prepared and have a different level of involvement. So there's a knowledge base article, grab me after the talk, more than happy to share it, where Red Hat explains what level of support they assign to certain collections. So you might have some Cisco gear in your infrastructure. That's a very well-supported collection. Red Hat's very involved with Cisco, very high-quality module and collection, very well-trusted. And that's one of those Red Hat certified content collections. And there's varying levels with various industry partners. So pretty much any name you can think of, again, Palo Alto as an example is one that comes to mind, could be found on that list. Not all of them are going to be on that Red Hat certified list, right? Because unfortunately, there's only so many Kims, right? Cool. This one's mine as well. All right, so we've been yammering on about Ansible for a little while, right? So one of those things in collections I was talking about that you can share, and one of those things that was hard to share in roles, was this idea of plugins. So interestingly enough, when Ansible was built, it was really built to be extensible from the get-go. So while it is itself written in Python, you might think, hey, I got Ansible, and this is all I can do with it, right? I looked, there's a copy module, there's a service module, that must be all I can do with it. But when they built it, they really had some forethought, and they said, hey, it would be great if some of these concepts right from the outset should be extensible. And there's a ton of different things on this list. This is basically everything that Ansible tries to do, right? So whether that's the action plugin, which is where it kind of decides on what it's going to do, become, that's privilege escalation, right? How you become from a normal user to become root on a system, or administrator if it's a Windows box. All of these different functionalities that Ansible had to do, they took a step back and they said, hey, it'd be great if we just write it from the outset as a plugin, because maybe the next guy that comes along or next girl that comes along is going to want to do something different here, and now you can. So, and that kind of leads us into where we're going to talk next with modules. If you want,
Modules is yours.
I'll take it too. All right, so modules, if you remember, that was one of those items on the list. So that's one of the types of plugins. And a lot of times it's the one that gets the most attention. So if you've written an Ansible playbook before, it's the thing that's in the playbook, right? When you write your list of tasks, it might be, Ansible built-in package that's going to go install an actual package on a system. Those are modules. It's a type of plugin, happens to be one of the most common. We got a couple examples on the screen just of some common types that you might have seen in the past if you've seen Ansible at all. The service module, as it sounds, right, that's managing like a systemd service on a server. Ping, not an ICMP ping. This is just confirming that Ansible can talk to the manage node in question. And command is the evil Swiss Army knife plugin, if you will. So again, if it's got a bash command, you can pretty much do it with Ansible. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was a lot. So anybody have any direct questions on that stuff very quickly? Because we got a lot of slides for you. Or if you're all glazed over and just like keep going, that's fine too. All right, silence is golden. All right, so we came up with a solution in search of a problem. So we came up with a problem. What we're going to lead you through here is the idea and then the example that we built from it. So we all now work at this company called Drink More Water Limited. And we have standardization, which is fantastic, right? So we want consistency across the environment. And as a staff engineer was saying, I want to use Ansible for all the stuff that I do, but I need to follow this goofy standard that we have set. So it's really hard to use that. How do I do this with Ansible? So we're going to say, well, how does an engineer solve this? How do I get a raise for solving this? And then how do we make that IT director feel some pain because they came up with this weird rule set? So Python is the answer for at least one, probably two. I'm not sure if it solves the third one. All right, so our goofy naming convention. We must have it be NetBIOS compatible. And we are taking this stuff from things we have seen in the field in the last couple years. That is still a problem for people, I guess. We need a building ID because we have a lot of locations. It has to be 0 padded, and our source of truth is this CSV file parked on a share somewhere. I don't know why, but that's why. It has to have the time zone in it. Whose idea was that? No clue. Whatever that device is in that time zone, it needs to be in the name. We have an entity, so like the device name can be between 3 and 7 characters. We have to give it a function that gets shortened to a single letter. And then we've got this component bucket that's like whatever you want. So -01 or Tim is great or whatever you've got with the remaining characters. This is what our building data looks like. It is a CSV with some addresses and arbitrary numbers of these buildings as the company has grown. And then this is what a Denver web server might look like. It is 22S MST Web-01. Isn't that a great server name? Absolutely lovely. But it has our building ID, our device function, our time zone, our entity, and our component all in there. So how do we solve this? Well, we can do this with Ansible. You want to explain why we shouldn't?
Yeah, interesting. The Ansible guy says you shouldn't do it with Ansible, right? No. In a way. So again, while Ansible can do a lot of things, there's often better ways to express our kind of thoughts or what we need to do. So while Ansible could certainly solve this problem, right? There's you have Jinja inside of Ansible. You could template out a string. You could do various conditionals if that.
You just run awk.
You could probably shell out to awk, right? Awk can do anything. So yes, while you could bend Ansible's arm, and this is kind of the premise of the talk, right? We came up with a problem to kind of fit the scenario. There's often times where you may feel like, okay, this is maybe not the greatest idea. Like, the Ansible playbook starts looking really hairy. You got all these when conditions and different variables being registered and stuff like that. Then that's usually a point where, as the Ansible engineer, I come and say, hey, like maybe this is a better place for Python. It could be a little bit cleaner. We could do a little bit better unit testing on the Python code, get a little bit better, clear understanding that this actually does what we think it does. So it's always a balancing act, just like anything else when you're looking at doing anything in code. It's like, okay, is this better in Ansible or better in Python? Anytime we've started to get into these crazy logical scenarios, that's where we start to think, hey, maybe a module written in Python is a better fit here.
So yes, we want to solve this with Python because as we all know, if you can dream it, you can do it, right? You can figure out that logic in Python. You can have that single module everywhere. You make it pip installable. That's easy to deal with. anywhere, or you can ship it as a wheel, however you want to. You're sort of separating those concerns and then saying, I'm testing my Python where I should test my Python. I'm using unit test, I'm using PyTest, I'm doing all of the things that I know how to do in Python, and then letting Ansible sit on top of that rather than trying to figure out where those things cross and understand how to deal with those overlaps. And like Tim said, the testing becomes a nightmare. It just lets you kind of, for me, I'm a more Python than Ansible, so I go to him. But I can write my Python side, and then I don't need to worry so much about the Ansible side. All right, so there are a couple different ways you can solve this, and I'll kind of do the quick one, and then I'll let him do some detail. So we're going to talk about a collection, because that's how we solved it. But this does fit into a little bit more Python sort of maturity. So when I'm talking about making it installable, it's a package. It's probably published and distributable. So let's say you're a company that doesn't put their source out available to anyone, and maybe you don't have internal infrastructure. You're going to run into some problems here of like, hey, that thing that I said you could easily install now becomes less easy to install. And that does happen, right? Some people guard their IP and they don't have the infrastructure internally for all teams. You know, maybe one team has it, maybe one team doesn't. So you do have to kind of consider that as one of the ways to deal with it. Is like, can I do all of those things and make this effective? That doesn't mean you can't still write a module without that. So when we say bare Python, it's just sort of a regular script that you could write. It's a little bit faster. You can iterate. You know, it's what you're used to. Very approachable. If you know Python and don't really know much else, you can still be effective. And then you get to work around those maturity problems, right? I think the biggest thing is like, I don't have Artifactory for my group, so how do I get everyone to pip install this? I don't know. Well, I have this file, and if it's on a file share, I can send it around. You want to add anything else to that? Okay. So this one is, yeah, why don't you take that one?
Yeah. So just, a little bit of graphic here, but back to, what do we do when it comes to actually how an Ansible plugin works. So again, there was that whole list of inventory plugins, tests, lookup plugins, inventory vars, a bunch of other ones, right? There's like 20 on that list. What does that actually look like, or what do we mean when we say writing an Ansible plugin? Tends to be one of two things. So you think about a lot of the plugin types like inventory or lookup, you're inheriting a base class. So you crack open a Python file in a directory structure that doesn't look too dissimilar from the one on the screen. And you're extending a base class and implementing the functionality that you need in that class. All stuff as Python developers here in the audience, you're probably like, rock on, I can do that. And really that's kind of the intent with kind of this talk, is to express that there's often an animosity when I talk to people about writing Ansible modules. They're like, oh my God, that's got to be this big thing. It's got to be so formal and hard. And in reality, it's only typically a couple of lines of code. So with that in mind. All right, so what does it actually look like to write a Python module? So this is, or not Python module, excuse me, an Ansible module. And this is the actual code that is on our GitHub for the module that we wrote for the presentation, right? So right up at the top, you just see that we're importing Drink More Water decoder, right? That is the Python module that actually Colin did most of the development on, and that's where all of our business logic lives. So if you're, again, Python developers here, really comfortable writing Python, capture all your business logic over there. You've got your tests over there that are passing. Life is great. Everybody's happy. Awesome. On the Ansible side, all I need to do is consume that. Right? So I'm importing it. I've got a little bit of a boilerplate as well. All of this boilerplate comes from the Ansible documentation. So I literally went to the Ansible docs. Big fan of that site. Again, it's a public documentation site. You can contribute if you find anything wrong. It's openly encouraged. And this, again, came from that. So those next couple of lines are all just boilerplate right from there. The module args, think of that like a function definition, right? So when we have our Ansible playbook and you've got that module that you're calling, everything that's that next level in are module arguments that Ansible calls them, a lot like a function definition, right? This is how that data gets into our module. Once we're in our module, we instantiate one of our classes. So that's one of those helper classes that we were importing earlier on in the last boilerplate, and that's what helps us link all of that data to the Ansible process, right? So again, we just get to consume a lot of the other people's hard work, which is awesome. In the middle there, we see those two lines about decoder and DMW decoder. Those are the only bits that are kind of a non-boilerplate, if you will. And that's where we're instantiating an instance of the class that Colin wrote, and then we're just pulling in the module parameters, right, the function declaration equivalent, from our arguments that the user gave us, and pushing that through a member function and getting the result. So on the Ansible module side, it ends up being pretty straightforward, right? We're just instantiating a class, calling a method, and storing it in a variable. And then at the very end there, you see we're storing it in this special variable called result that we're going to return. And that's this last little bit. So again, we kind of broke the chunk of our module up into 3 different slides here. So the very last bit where it's exiting, right, that's returning back to the main Ansible process that result variable that we saw earlier. And of course, just like any other Python script, so those not familiar with how Ansible modules work, they actually run on the target. So the web server that you're managing or the router that you're managing, what have you, they're actually executing on that remote node. So these bottom lines should look familiar to anybody that's written one of those kind of traditional scripts, if you will, right? We're just, if name is main, have at her. All right. You want to take assumptions?
Yeah, sure. And how are we on time?
got
Okay.
speed up.
We might just do, we have a recorded demo, so we might do the recorded demo. So there's a couple assumptions about this. Ansible is obviously installed in the recorded demo, and our package DMW decoder is installed. And then we are going to very quickly look at the recorded demo.
You're not on the screen.
I gotta move it over probably.
Yep.
Is this, yeah? Hey, look at that. All right, Tim, you want to narrate since you
Yeah.
did the recording?
Yep, so it's a very short recording. It's just us executing.
Microphone.
Oh, yes, thank you. All right.
There's a lot of like ambient noise from upstairs too.
You can also take it off the
Oh.
stand.
Perfect. All right. I am now mobile. Perfect. So real quick execution here. So we wrote our own Python, or our own Ansible module using a Python module that Colin wrote. And now we're just going to run it using Ansible-playbook. Here on my test system, I've got a couple of containers that I'm managing, and we're going to generate some host names for them. And I put it in debug mode here just to kind of show some additional information for those that haven't seen Ansible run before. And Colin, I think, yeah, it goes really fast, so he's trying to pause it here. So the first step here, it's just gathering some information from the manage node. You can actually skip this usually if you want, but I left it on just for the sake of leaving it on. This step, it's actually, good graphics bug here, at least on this side. Go ahead. What that step is doing is actually running that Python script. So it's actually connecting to the 3 containers that I set up for the demo, running that Python script that we saw in the previous couple of slides, and generating a host name and storing that in the variable. And if you can get it to show a little bit better here, we will. If not, we can put the video up with the presentation stuff as well. Or you can download the module and run it as well. Part of the module that's not shown as Colin's working on this here is it's talking to a public web service to get that time zone information. So you would need to get an API key for a public geolocation API, but it's free. Cool. And if we can't get the image bug fixed here,
I think it's just the VLC thing.
there it is, right there. All right, so it is hard to see, but you can see right here, for those in the audience, this is that special variable name that we saw in those slides, and then that's the name that was generated. So then in theory, in your Ansible playbook, you could consume that variable to do whatever it is you want to do. Set the host name, again, whatever the business reason was for you writing your module. Cool, go ahead, Colin.
Okay, so we want to talk about a couple of potholes, and I wish you wouldn't liberally throw my name around about that module that I wrote because it's absolute garbage. So we made some decisions for this, right? That CSV file, I would hope that you don't have to deal with that. I mean, maybe you do, but this is how we did it. It was included in the package too, so that's probably not how you do it. But again, for us to demo, that's how we put it together. We obfuscated the secrets. You want to?
Yep, so Ansible has a number of ways it can handle secret data, right? So passwords, any kind of credential information that you want. One of the mechanics you'll see in a lot of Ansible modules, so like if you use the VMware module, for example, you'll often see that they have fallbacks for the value that's stored in there. So like you don't actually have to provide the module the password, or in our case, the API key for that public API I was talking about. It will automatically look at a predetermined environment variable. So you can set up your environment to have that environment variable stashed away, safely, and it'll know to go look there. So you don't have to commit that into any kind of repo with your playbook. Go ahead.
If you have like a vault-like system, can you integrate it with that instead
Yeah. So the question was, if you have some kind of vault or secret system, can you integrate it with? And most certainly. And there's a number of different ways. So you and I could talk after, whether it's Ansible Vault, HashiCorp Vault, or a number of other products. Certainly.
Okay, like I said, that package was oddly written. I didn't actually start it as installable, so we did that last minute. And it's like, don't look at that code and say, this is how I should write Python. And then if you check out our repo, it is monorepo-like. We kind of shoveled everything in there. So typically, if you're going to write an Ansible module, that would be its own repo, and then your Python would be in its own repo. But just the way that we had to release this out in the world, it's all in one place. So just, don't trip over our weird decisions. There are other dependencies to consider. So there is a support matrix, and that's the next slide. Will show that there's differences in the control and the manage node. And then AAP2 has its own set.
So we are running a little tight on time, so I won't be rating you on with AAP2 stuff. But if you are considering or looking at deploying AAP2, it does have its own set of requirements and how you deploy it and all that good stuff. More than happy to have a beverage and discuss that at length with you.
And really that kind of lines up with this. Here's where we bumped into this. I wrote my module. I gave it to Tim. He said, hey, it doesn't work. I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't work? Well, I wrote it in 3.10 and he was running 3.9. And I had completely forgot that the control node should support down to 3.9 for the version that we were using. So I had to throw away my fancy feature and do some if statements instead. And you can see in the repository, I just commented out the match statement that I used, which, man, I love that thing, but it doesn't work in 3.9. So, we had to deal with that. And it's just one thing to consider, that when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're supporting all the way down to the version that's needed in your environment. And then after that, I got it under my skin to say, okay, let's take a look. Like, what does your environment look like? So I spun up Docker. I ran Debian, Ubuntu, Alpine, Rocky, and then Tim did RHEL earlier. Different versions, all the installed Python versions are there. And then what the package manager, so apt, DNF, APK, gave you if you just did an install Ansible. And then what you did if you pip install Ansible core. So as you can see, it drifts a little bit, but look where it's tied to. It's really that version of Python in the host system. So again, if you've got a very diverse environment, you may need to care about how far down does your module need to be supported, because you're running it on something that's older than you maybe thought. Yeah.
Yep. And we have RHEL with the asterisk here, and I only put RHEL 8. But for those that don't know, RHEL actually is really great at supporting Python. So while it comes with and often is seen as having an old Python, it is packaged optionally with often a multiple of different versions. So as an example, RHEL 8, while it comes with 3.6, is fully supported to install 3.9 and run with that. RHEL 9 has newer versions yet than that. So if you're ever running on a RHEL box and you're like, oh man, this Python's kind of crusty, I'd like to get a new one, take a look at the package manager. It's in there. It's supported. You just have to know where to find it.
Okay, so if you're interested in looking, there's that URL again. Tim's mentioned it several times. The docs page is really good for Ansible. We'll put this slide deck probably up on the GitHub repo as well, or if I need to give it to Heather or Joe or anybody, we'll make it available. If you'd like to get a hold of us, these are our email addresses at work. We are both on GitHub. I did some due diligence and actually put other stuff into my GitHub. So like I'm on Mastodon and I am in the ChiPy Slack. So yeah, come and tell me how awful my code is in the ChiPy Slack. Okay. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I should just leave that up. So anybody have any questions for us? Start at the front.
You mentioned that there's some module repository that you can contribute
Just gonna hand this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when they rebuilt that collections feature I was yammering on about, they broke a lot of the Ansible modules out into different subgroups. So as an example, maybe you're interested in cloud. There is an entire subgroup of cloud modules now. Networking, same thing. So if that's any area you're interested in, you could find that matching collection. Usually they're published on GitHub, and you can take a look at the code, make fixes, do whatever you'd like to do. Again, all the Windows modules are written in PowerShell, so if you caught that in the matrix, Windows modules are written in PowerShell. Anything to manage, basically anything else is Python. Yeah, great question. There was one in the back.
I was just wondering what other languages can you write the plugins in?
Yep. So the question was, what other languages can you write the plugins in? To my knowledge, and I don't know if this is officially deprecated now, as you saw, the type module that was on the screen is really just running the file. So in theory, anything that could be executable on your managed node could be a module. The preference is Python. And then again, like I was mentioning, if it's a Windows managed node, PowerShell. Great question, though.
How do you do error handling with Office?
Yeah, so the question was error handling. Great question. There is certain exceptions that Ansible itself implements, so you can filter exceptions up and get those presented to the user if that's your flavor. If not, it'll just catch normal exceptions and throw them right in the command line that you saw running.
We did that in that plugin we wrote earlier in the year.
Yeah.
I think that you had mentioned something about like unit testing.
Yeah.
Is it something that like did you mean unit testing using Ansible or like unit testing Ansible itself, like your own like playbook or something?
Yeah. So the question was testing, and that's a loaded question. So we've kind of mentioned it a bunch of times in different contexts. So first, the first context was that Drink More Water decoder Python module or Python package. That itself is tested with PyTest, correct, Colin?
Correct.
The Ansible code itself can be tested in two ways. So Ansible provides a product called Ansible-test, or a binary called Ansible-test, and it extends unit test. So you can write unit tests for, say, an Ansible module or any other type of plugin in Python unit test-esque language. I tend to gravitate towards what's on screen. So another feature of that Ansible test tool is you can write roles that will run your Python module that you're writing. So you get this nice role look, if you will, of Ansible code. So I'm very familiar with Ansible itself. So this is actually then, if I run the Ansible test command, is building my Python-based module, installing it, in my case, locally in a virtual environment, and then running this role against a fake host, usually a container, and then I get the results. So I find this to be a really quick way to get a lot of coverage for those that care about that. And it feels really real life. So as an example, when we were writing the demo playbook for that video, I actually just pulled up the unit test, and I was like, I'm just going to copy that first call to that task there because it's the same thing. So yeah, a lot of ways to test. Highly recommend it. Yeah.
Separation of concerns.
Yes.
That's where you need to test Python, Ansible.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point. So Colin has, obviously a bunch more tests that test that class that I was calling. Here I'm just testing that the module works and that it, asserts and generates the one name I thought it should. Great question.
Do you have a recommendation for secrets management in Ansible for hackers that don't have a ton of access to paid secret vaults?
Yeah. So question was, any suggestions for secret managers? HashiCorp Vault can be used. There's Ansible Vault, and honestly, Ansible Vault can be pretty powerful locally. You can, get really high-grade crypto out of that. There's a number of ways to leverage that, both in CI/CD systems and locally on your machines. So definitely, I would wear out Ansible Vault, and then start looking around maybe at HashiCorp Vault and go from there. Cool.
We're over time, so. Any other questions?
If not, it's time to learn about PDFs.
We'll be having a drink. Come talk to